So let's talk about white tears. Not crying, not emotions, but white tears. The kind of shift power, redirect blame, and quietly rewrite the story. White tears aren't dangerous because they are tears, they're dangerous because of what society does when they fall. When a white woman cries, the room often stops. People rush to comfort her, voices lower, question disappears, and suddenly she becomes the victim, even when she wasn't the one harmed. That's the part, that's the power part we don't like to talk about. So, guys, watch this video until the end to understand better. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, a comment, and to subscribe.
Why is it that women who look like me are so often averse to any kind of call out, critique, or correction? Responses are usually either denial, gaslighting, tears, self-victimization, all sorts of other weird tactics you just wouldn't expect from an ally. It's because women who look like me are first and foremost expected to abide by the unspoken rules of white supremacy. And one of those rules states that conflict is bad. It's basically expressly forbidden, especially to this color women. This kind of supremacy hates conflict, because conflict actually serves a really important purpose, especially if our end goal is to be liberated. Unfortunately, there are people who profit from all of our oppression and they do not want us to be liberated. And the best way to reach that goal is to sow discord and then make conflict a very taboo and forbidden in an unspoken way type of thing. And the only thing that would keep us from any kind of solidarity is to not be aware of how our privilege affects one another and what it costs other people. And then to also be afraid to confront and deconstruct it, because you think that by doing so, you would be further removing yourself from power, which you technically would, but you'd be gaining something much better than power, which is solidarity. But power really operates through fear and coercion, right? So women, especially this color women, are taught these kind of unspoken rules that they are not to be angry. And nobody tells women outright, like, you're not allowed to be angry. Angry women are discouraged. Questions are discouraged. Women that are not afraid of conflict are discouraged. Men have been saying this for centuries. It goes back as far as the Bible, you know, like nobody wants a quarrelsome wife, nobody wants a nagging wife, etc., right? Nobody wants an angry blue-haired feminist. And it creates this clusterfuck of excuses for us to have an interest in denying our own privilege. This also values perfection over everything. This is very true with men, but in like an angry, narcissistic way, right? Like men are allowed to perform violence under these hierarchies and in these oppressive systems. Women are not. Women are not allowed to perform violence or anger. And again, the women that do tend to express any type of like anger or anything other than compliance are labeled as angry, quarrelsome, nagging. It's crazy. And like I said, all of this creates the perfect conditions for the worst kind of denial of actual reality, because so often white women are just afraid to be seen as imperfect, which is what we all are. And they're afraid that they're going to lose something, that they're not focusing on what we could really be gaining, which is actual solidarity with the women that we claim to care about as feminists. I'm going to draw a few parallels here between this kind of supremacy, narcissism, and the patriarchy, and the way that in order to survive, all of those things must strike a very delicate balance between sanctioned and normalized violence, but also an extreme fear of conflict, whether it be interpersonal or something bigger altogether. Make no mistake, white supremacy exists in broad daylight. It hides in plain sight. The reason that it hasn't been eradicated is because no one is allowed to talk about it. Okay, now let's draw some of those parallels. The parallels between like white women and men have been drawn over and over again. White women are the men of women, etc. Because the same way that most men hate it when women bring up the patriarchy and bring up how they have been hurt and marginalized and affected by the patriarchy, and men usually run to their own defense instead of the defense of women, who are literally telling the men, this is how your privilege actually can only exist at my expense. This is where the narcissism parallel comes in, because they can't like handle that strike to their ego. It's the same way in which white women hate being called out by black women who say that, hey, this is how your privilege actually does take away from me in real life. This is how your privilege actually comes at my expense. And instead of like rightfully supporting black women and giving them a platform to talk about these, as well as teach other white women how this shows up, because white women oftentimes will only listen to other white women, and only when they're like saying things in a palatable, instead of like being comfortable with that conflict. White women's role in white supremacy is actually to act as the pacifier of that conflict, is actually to protect white men from the consequences of their actions. Okay, let me explain. White supremacy is actually a very violent thing. Okay, so they're not afraid of violence, they're afraid of conflict. Okay, violent conflict is expository. It oftentimes leads to change. It leads to the rethinking of things. Like, conflict is actually a good thing. And the fact that white women are tasked with pacifying it and really not letting it slip through any cracks is exemplified every single time that I have had to make a video walking back a bad take and apologizing, putting myself on the spot for, I thought I had this really great take, and then black women called me out, and now I see the light, and I just want to share that with the rest of y'all. This is what we should be doing. Which is, again, these are the benefits of conflict. Nobody really loses when we have interpersonal conflict, especially when that conflict is happening in good faith and it's marginalized communities that are allowed to bring injustices to the table. I'm not talking about top-down conflict, to be clear. And the reason that I talk about bottom-up conflict is because in order to unearth and expose systems of oppression, we have to listen to the people that are actually being oppressed by these systems. Otherwise, we're never gonna see it, because it doesn't affect the privileged people, it affects the people that are not privileged. Does that make sense? Like, you wouldn't be able to see the oppression if you're not being oppressed. And so we need to really address like what is being taken away from people, who is benefiting, and who's actually suffering. But a lot of times white people have this thing where they insist on civility and politeness, individual responsibility rather than collective responsibility, and the idea of like systemic oppression. This is why a lot of people are like, you're not going to put that on me. I didn't enslave anybody. Like, what is this white guilt that you're trying to put on me? And people are really just trying to address systemic oppression, because we don't fall out of a coconut tree every day. Shout out to Kamala Harris. We exist in the context of everything that came before us, and all of those things can trickle down, and all of those fruits come from the same branch. Basically, this idea that if we don't talk about it, that means it doesn't exist. If we don't talk about it, we can pretend like it doesn't exist. And the reason that I say it's like white women that are in charge of this, especially in America, is because they are like that middle ground between white men and people of color. Silence, denial, color blindness, the idea of that, waiting for better times or wanting to go back to the good old days, asking oppressed people to do the emotional labor and like prove their oppression, like, and then gaslighting them about it. Those are all techniques that white people use to avoid conflict while they preserve their privilege. Avoiding conflict means you get to preserve that structure, because it won't be exposed and rooted out without this kind of conflict, without this kind of like acknowledgement of it. Time and time again in my own comment section, when I have to address a bad take, there's always a bunch of white women being like, no, like we got it. You did not need to explain yourself. You did not need to apologize. I'm so sorry you were bullied like this. It's like, I wasn't bullied. I was educated. Nothing really bad comes from this type of conflict, of exposing our ignorance, of exposing the things that we didn't know, and then us being able to look at it together and being like, okay, so how do we move forward? I see why that was harmful for me to do, and I do not wish to harm you any further, so I'm going to shut the fuck up next time. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff is really easy. If you want collective liberation, we cannot have that without exposing every system of injustice. By this idea of like white feminism or insufficient feminism or boss babe feminism is more than just even racial confrontation, the confrontation of like race related issues. It also like it doesn't stop actually at any point. You know what I mean? Because it also involves homophobia, it also involves transphobia, ableism, classism, all of those things, because there is silent conflict and silent violence in all of those structures that once again we don't like people to name, so that we, the privileged class, can continue to live in comfort while not having to address any of this and not having to pay the price of our privilege, because other people are paying that price. We're the ones that actually uphold all of these kinds of supremacies and isms and all of that, because we're afraid of the confrontation. We're afraid of public conflict. We're afraid of the idea of imperfection. You can't reconcile what you refuse to admit. You can't address the things you refuse to admit. Structural change actually requires disruption, and conflict creates the pressure for that disruption. When our comfort routines, our institutions are challenged, that forces the people in power to respond. That's why it's really their biggest fear. That's why they're sending troops to help squash these protests, like public displays of conflict. Not only that, but conflict is the only thing that exposes what's really at stake. It forces people to take sides and to clarify what their actual values are, to avoid hiding behind things like both sideism, not wanting to offend, or politeness, or passive aggression. If we prioritize individual comfort, then we'll never have collective liberation. That's why I feel like white women are such an important link in all of this. At the same time, the weakest link in all of this, because white women have been brainwashed for years and years and years by the patriarchy that they're not supposed to be angry, that they're not supposed to feel rage or provoke conflict or anything like that. And so they project that onto other people because they themselves are uncomfortable with it and have demonized as impolite, as improper, as unladylike. And I really feel like it's 10 times worse with American women, because white American women are always juxtaposed next to the angry black woman stereotype. Like, you don't want to be like that, do you? You don't want to be this masculine, savage, bad bitch, etc. That's why there are those dog whistles. I'm not like that. That's really the I'm not like other girls of white womanhood. I won't challenge you. I won't nag you. I'll be the cool girl. I'll be the trad wife. And this is also the reason that white women and white people in general love the performative activism rather than actually getting their hands dirty, so to speak, rather than actually engaging in conflict and learning what being called out looks like, learning what taking responsibility actually looks like, because all of those things violate the tenets of white supremacy, which is perfection, the fear of public conflict, fear of confrontation, etc. Because you cannot call out and deconstruct what you can't. And that's the greatest trick that white supremacy ever pulled on all of us. That's why all forms of state sanctioned violence have become so normalized, and all sorts of oppression is normalized. We all feel like we can't really do anything about it because there's this fear of conflict, and there's this fear of punishment, and this fear of imperfection, and this fear of where do we go from here? What privileges am I gonna have to give up to make the world a better place? That's really the question that white supremacy does not want us looking for the answers of. And in this way, there's very much a parallel to narcissism, because again, narcissists, just like anybody that uses violence and oppression to stay in power, they benefit from their victims' silence. They also utilize things like flying monkeys to uphold this idea that they are not to be confronted, that they are not to be made to take accountability, to take responsibility. They can weaponize all of these other tactics in order to confuse you, to gaslight you, to make you feel like your reality isn't real. And those things include literal gaslighting, weaponized emotions. This is something white women do, the white woman tears. This is all the narcissist playbook, okay? White supremacy and the patriarchy are literally teaching people to be narcissists and to act and operate like narcissists. So you have that, you have the weaponization of other people, the flying monkey that will be sent by the narcissist to either threaten, cajole, gaslight you from a different angle, deny that whatever you think happened, threaten you with consequences. Narcissists don't like to work directly. They actually will communicate usually with you only through like a third party. These weaponized actions, like they're putting on a complete front because they know that once they're exposed, they'll have to take responsibility and accountability. And that's really their biggest fear, is like any hit to their ego, which they will do anything to avoid and to protect that ego. Something you need to keep in mind. The reason that Black women draw these parallels between white women who are passive aggressive, afraid of conflict, avoidant, try to shame people with politeness or whatever, like gaslight their way out of things or cry their way out of things, with men, because men do the same thing, right? Like when they get caught cheating, they start screaming, crying, throwing up, throwing themselves on the floor. You have to call the ambulance for them. Like these are all, like, there are parallels here. It's the same thing that narcissists will do. It's why we as women draw that parallel between men and narcissism. And all of this overlaps with all systems of oppression. Narcissists are oppressive. Whiteness as a standard of perfection is oppressive to anybody who's not white. Ableism is a standard of oppression to everybody who's not, able-bodied or whatever. Homophobia, transphobia, all of those things are systems of oppression for us to accept generalized oppression hidden in plain sight, broad daylight. When it comes to classes, well, those people are poor because they deserve it. Those people, I don't want to give them money because they're going to spend it on drugs or alcohol. Like all of that kind of stuff is just society refusing to shine a light on the real issue because we're each so busy protecting our individual privilege and comfort. This is why even people within those intersections will sometimes try to align themselves with power, which by default aligns them with oppression and being an oppressor. And they become an oppressor to other people that are just like them because there is more privilege to gain sometimes to a certain extent by aligning yourself with those systems of power. And white women usually have the most to gain from that alignment, which is why you see this criticism made the most often from the perspective of Black women towards white women, is that white women are afraid of conflict and they're very uncanny to deal with because conflict is not as demonized and as discouraged amongst oppressed communities. If you are trying to avoid conflict, just know that you have something to lose. The good news is you have nothing to lose. When the world becomes a better place for everybody, it becomes a better place for everybody. A rising tide lifts all boats. What white supremacy wants you to believe is that this will all make the world a worse place. That's a projection. People that have been oppressed want to be liberated. I say this all the time as a woman about men who fear that women are going to control and dominate them if we are given the reins to like change a few things here and there in society. It's like, no, we don't want to do to you what's been done to us. We just want to live and be liberated from these systems of oppression. So as a white, you need to keep that in your peripheral vision, that Black women do not want to oppress you. They just want you to see what they're going through. Do not be afraid of that conflict. Everybody wins. You learn something. A community is strengthened and solidarity is gained every time a white woman keeps her white tears and does not passive aggressively avoid confrontation and avoid conflict, because all that does is get us further and further and further away from any actual resolution or any liberation. You need to understand that other women's liberation is directly connected to your own. Conflict is not the enemy. Injustice is the enemy. All right? Stay safe out there, y'all. I love you.
Hannah Berner weaponizes her tears in a very classic tale as old as time white woman way. And I'm positive she's going to go on Giggly Squad next week or whenever the episode comes out and she's going to cry about how embarrassed she is that she is getting dragged online. And the gigglers are going to defend her, and they're going to be in the comments being like, you guys just don't understand her personality. And everybody's going to forget about this in a week. But as somebody who stands Summer House and hates Kyle and also hates Hannah, I will not be forgetting this. Hannah Berner getting dragged online is my favorite thing in the world, because I have the opposite of a soft spot in my heart for white women who use their tears as weapons to get out of accountability for their actions, which is all Hannah Berner does, as seen on every season of Summer House she's on.
Hey, what's up, y'all? I been on this app and seeing a lot of different things, and I just need to know, is it just me, my black people, is it just me that's getting sick and tired of our so-called white allies on here sharing our stories and our trauma and our shit, saying it's I'm so sorry and I didn't realize and thank you for educating me, and then the white tears start flowing, and it all of a sudden our trauma becomes something about their white pain and shit that they've gone through? I mean, what is that? Like, really, what the fuck is that? How the fuck did a story about Emmett Till become traumatic to a white person who lost their dog in kindergarten? Or how the fuck did Breonna Taylor getting shot to death while she was asleep in her bed become their Roe v. Wade story? Like, how the fuck? Like, you're our allies, you're our friends, you're fighting for us, but you're making the shit about you. Honestly, all of the white people that mattered the most to me in this world have died since I moved back to Indiana like 12 years ago. My mom died 6 months after I got here. 5 years ago, my auntie mama died. I don't have any white people left that in real life I give a fuck about. So I have no problems removing every other white person that's TikTok adjacent, Facebook adjacent, I don't know, real life adjacent. Ooh, because we both breathe the same air. I'm sick of your performative bullshit. You are not my fucking ally. You are really just using our pain for fucking clickbait so you can get more views. And I'm sick to death of y'all. Go fucking sit down somewhere. Go hang out with your clan cousins and burn a cross somewhere, because you're not here for us. You're here for yourself and the attention it brings.
If they didn't record this situation, this man would have been in handcuffs or in a box. Before there were laws against this, before there was cameras catching their actions, people would constantly be lynched and towns will be constantly burned down. And this is not an over-exaggeration, from the simple accusations of a manic white woman. And then after these men are already swinging from trees, they would be like, I think we got the wrong guy. I think we got the wrong person. Wow. After the entire towns have been burned down, they would then say, oh, you know what? This was a lie. This was a mistake. This has happened more than 20 times. This has happened a lot of times, actually. And her husband dismissing the guy in the situation shows exactly how these situations end up happening in history. Because you see the white woman tears not from sorrow, but from accountability and the lack of ability to take accountability. Because in her mind, her behavior is justified because that is what internal racism and bigotry and bias will do to you. And if there was not a camera recording that situation, just like she lied about him saying, hey, I live here, she would have lied about the whole situation simply for her not to seem racist and or wrong. And guess what possibly would have happened to that black man? Another life can have been lost from the accusations of a white woman, either from her husband attacking him or the police hurting him. People do better.
Historically, white women's tears have been treated as truth, as innocence, as agency. They've been believed without evidence and protected without question. And too often, those tears have come at the expense of Black, black, Latino, like the minority, and a look, a claim of fear, a trembling voice, and suddenly someone else is seen as aggressive, threatening, or guilty just for existing. This isn't about saying white women are evil or manipulative by nature. It's about recognizing that society has given white women the kind of emotional authority that others don't have. When women of color cry, they often get called dramatic, angry, unstable, or ignored altogether. When men of color show emotions, it's labeled as dangerous, but when white women cry, it's framed as vulnerability that must be protected. That imbalance ruins lives. Like, there are people of color who have lost jobs, freedom, reputation, sometimes their lives, because someone else's discomfort mattered more than their humanity. Because white tears were treated as an emergency while their pain was treated as a noise. And the thing is, white tears don't have to be intentional to cause harm. That's what makes them so powerful. A white woman to doesn't have to mean to weaponize her emotions for the system to do it for her. And the system already knows who to protect. So when conversations about racism or accountability happens and focus suddenly shifts to soothing white discomfort, the harm gets buried. The original issue disappears. The person calling out injustice becomes the problem. And let's be clear, accountability is not an attack, discomfort is not an oppression, being challenged is not violence. But when white tears have taught society to to confuse those things, and if we actually care about justice, we have to stop treating emotional distress as most important thing in the room. We have to learn to sit with discomfort instead of using tears as an escape hatch. And we have to listen, really listen when people of color say this hurts me without demanding that they soften it to protect someone else's feelings, because every time white tear derails accountability, someone else pays the price, and we have seen it not just now but in history too. And that's why they are dangerous, not because of emotion but because of power. And what we are saying is not that white women shouldn't cry or show emotions, but to realize what can happen if you are just like, if you're using your privilege the wrong way, you can ruin someone else's life. And it's best for you to sit and think of, if I do this, what is going to happen to this person, because we have known it is out there, the history is out there, it happens every day, and we all see. So you can say that I didn't know this will happen. So guys, leave a comment in the comment section about what you think of this video. Don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video.